PowerPoint. Where is it? Nearly there. Okay, there's our PowerPoint. Let me just. Give you a sec. Just sharing this. Share. Okay. Done. Right, we are live. The whole world can see us. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Right. So, oops. Gone.
Gone.
Right. Okay. Right. Iris, over to you.
Korach incites a mutiny, challenging Moses' leadership and the granting of the kahuna, the priesthood, to Aaron. He is accompanied by Moses' inveterate foes, Dathan and Abiram. Joining them are 250 distinguished members of the community who offer the sacrosanct ketoret, incense, to prove their worthiness for the priesthood. The earth opens up and swallows the mutineers, and a fire consumes the ketoret offerers. A subsequent plague is stopped by Aaron's offering of ketoret. Aaron's staff miraculously blossoms and brings forth almonds to prove that his designation as high priest is divinely ordained. God commands that a teruma, uplifting from each crop of grain, wine, and oil, as well as all firstborn sheep and cattle and other specified gifts, be given to the Kohanim, the priests.
Thank you. Okay. So, by the way, I noticed something. I don't know if anyone's looked at this week's Parsha yet, but I noticed something when we're laying this morning, which is quite, I thought is actually quite kind of poetic and cute. When Korach comes with his challenge to Moshe, he says, Rav Lachem b'nei Levi. No, is that right? 1 second, let me look up the original. Let me quote this correctly.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. Anyway, Korach says Rav Lachem, which basically means it's too much. You've taken too much for yourselves. You've grabbed all the power. Or in modern English, you might say it's too much. It's just too much already. And when Moshe comes back to him, he says the same thing. He says, you've gone too far. He says, Rav Lachem, uses the exact same phrase back to him. He parrots it back to him. I noticed that this morning in the Parsha. Anyway, right. So let's see. What was Korach's claim? We know Korach's claim. Who'd like to read number 1?
I will.
Please.
They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?
Right. On the I know we've learned this before in various different sort of nuances. On the surface, is there anything wrong with Korach's claim?
Well, only that, God has told Moses to do this.
Right. So basically, Moshe says, sorry, God appointed us. But theologically or philosophically, it seems like there's anything wrong with his claim. We're going to see a couple of sources in a minute that would seem to back up his claim. Are we not always preaching to all of our congregants how we all have the same obligations? We all have, the rabbi can't do mitzvahs for you. You have to do it for yourself. I've often quoted the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos where Rabbi Yossi ben Kizma was approached, and the community, the guy said to him, "Ritzonenu, it is our desire, shetado bimkomeinu, that you should come and live in our place, in our town." So the commentaries say that the other meaning is you should live in our place, meaning you'll come and live on our behalf. We'll live vicariously through you. You'll sit and study all day. You'll sit in Shul Shabbos while we go to the football, and you'll learn us our mitzvah points. And it doesn't work that way. We each have the potential. So let's see a few examples of this, right? Number 2, very famous. We read this on Shavuos. Who would like to read number 2? Any volunteers?
I'll read it.
Please.
But you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. Right,
everyone, the kingdom of priests. And did we not learn a couple of weeks ago? I think we did for somewhere in Vayikra. We talked about the Rambam where he said that spoke about the Kohen, remember, as the as the teacher and the guide, and we said, and it's not just a Cohen, but anyone who the idea of sacrifice, and anyone who's prepared to give up and sacrifice can also attain this kind of status. Now, that doesn't mean you can duchen and get called up first, but it means that we all have the power to be holy, right? And not only that, anyone remember what happened in last week's Sedra, Ba'aloischa at the end, with Eldad and Medad? Right? These were the two that were left behind that were going around prophesying and saying things in Moshe's name. And Joshua said, Moshe, you have to stop them. You know, they need to come to, his exact word was, Adoni kila aim, which means basically they should be destroyed. Let them come to a sticky end. And what does Moshe say back? Do you remember what Moshe said?
Something about, I wish everybody would be like that.
Right. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery in slightly different terms. He said, Halavai, if only everyone would be a prophet, that they would all have the Spirit of God. Here, let's see. Right, number 3. Who wants to read that?
Shall I read?
Go for it, Julian.
But Moses said to him, are you wrought up on my account? Would that all Hashem's people were prophets, that Hashem put the divine spirit upon them, which is what you just said.
Yeah. And by the way, you know, we've spoken recently, I think, about righteous indignation. And, you know, Yoshua had righteous indignation. Surely Moshe should have said, I appreciate your concern for me. And you're right. A student should feel that way towards his Rebbe. But actually, so Korach could have just been a student of Chumash. Comes along and says, we're all holy. We don't need you guys lording it over us. Now, the classic answer, of course, is that it's a bit like communism. You know, everyone's equal, except we're going to have a class of people who are not equal. So Korach didn't come along and say we should dismantle the patriarchy because, you know, what is it? Smash the patriarchy. What is it? Whatever it is. Anyway, because, you know, because we're all holy and we can all attain great heights. What he basically said was, why do we need a leader when we're all holy? And if we're going to have a leader, it should have been me, not you. So which is it? Is it a power grab or is it a sincere, you know, attempt at revolution? So the general feeling is that Korach is not sincere. And we see later on from the way that it's worded by Moshe that he wanted to be the high priest himself, right? He was their cousin. He was the son of Yitzhar, who was Moshe and Aaron's father's brother, Amram's brother. And he felt that, you know, why did it all go to one side of the family? He wanted the power. Now, that's Korach. What about everyone else? Right, who else was in his group?
Dathan and Abiram.
Right, who were from the tribe of Reuben. Right, let's see. Who did he choose to rise up against Moshe? So 250 Israelites, chiefs of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. Right, so these were not like the, you know, the dregs of society. These were, you know, the higher classes. Right, he managed to get the higher classes involved in this. Right, which in itself is a bit suspect. You want power, but you go and you want equality, but you go and sort of gather a power base. So which is it? And also, why did they join in? So everyone had different, as is often the case, right? People, you know, you get what do you call it? Unholy alliance, right? People with different issues. So what tribe were Datan and Aviram from? Did we just say this? Do you remember?
Reuben.
Right, Reuben. Who was Reuben?
Wasn't he the eldest son?
He was the oldest son. Right. So wait a minute. Why didn't he get all the leadership positions? Yeah. Levi, of course, is the third one. Sorry, just give me 1 sec. Shul office. I'll just check. It's not urgent. Hi. I'm just on my share on Zoom, but I thought I'll see if it's urgent. Yeah. Yeah, they're all correct. Yeah, they're all correct. Yeah, I thought I replied. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Okay, sorry. Right. Okay. Wasn't urgent. Okay. So Reuben was the eldest, right? Reuben, Shimon, Levi. Levi is the third son. So why did it all pass to him, right? So, you know, you can understand. Look, the Torah says you're supposed to give a double portion to the firstborn. The firstborn gets certain rights. So you could understand Reuben's frustration. The Ibn Ezra says, who are these 250 men of rank, these chieftains? Says that they were basically, they were generally firstborns who were upset that as a result of the golden calf, the priesthood had passed to the tribe of Levi rather than to the firstborn as was originally supposed to be, which of course is why we have the Pidyon Haben, right? Because the firstborn really should have been the priesthood. So you've got a lot of people with different gripes, right? And as is often the case, right? You get this in politics, right? You'll get a few Tory rebels siding with the Labour Party now, everyone's got different agendas. The Labour Party presumably wants to win the next election and be in power. The Tory rebels presumably would quite like to bring down the Prime Minister and replace him. It's a similar kind of thing, when they have these leadership contests. We say, it's doing it for altruistic reasons. No, you're not. You're doing it because you're on power. So it's an unholy alliance. And you've got an immediate problem there as well, because obviously everyone has a different agenda, right? They've got different agendas. What would have happened if Korach would have actually become the high priest? Would the rest of this lot have been happy with that? Doubt it.
Not.
He was from the tribe of Levi as well, so it wouldn't have made any difference. Had the tribe of Reuben got what they wanted, then Korach and the others would have been disappointed. And had all the chiefs got what they wanted, then the others, basically everyone wanted it. It's a power grab, so nobody's going to be happy. So the only united desire they have is to overthrow the leadership. Now, is conflict and tension a bad thing? Are you allowed to have a dissenting opinion? The answer is, of course you are. The whole Talmud is full of dissenting opinions. So at what point does it become problematic or wrong?
When it's going against something that God has actually said.
Yes, and that's a very important aspect of this. We haven't specifically touched on that yet. Obviously, if God says something, then that sort of does change the landscape. Although interestingly, we have a famous concept that the Torah is not in Shemayim. So it's the famous story of the rabbi who said, if the halacha is like me, then the skies will open and there will be thunder. And then they basically said, but the Torah is not in heaven. It doesn't matter if God gives us weird signs of things. The fact is that Torah is decided here on earth. But yes, I mean, God appointed us. But there's another issue here as well, which is has to be a legitimate dispute, right? There's such things as a legitimate dispute, right? We've spoken about this before. The Supreme Court hears a case. And let's say, I don't know how many they have sitting either in Britain or the US, but let's say, right, let's take a topical issue. So this Roe versus Wade in America, which has now been struck down by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court they haven't, by the way, contrary to what all the fake news says, the Supreme Court has not said that abortion has to be banned. They've said it's up to individual states to enact legislation rather than being constitutional, which to me seems quite sensible, but I don't know. Anyway, okay. So I think there are one or two judges that dissented. So that's absolutely fine. That's a legitimate difference of opinion. Not only did those judges dissent, but they probably published their reasons as well. I've mentioned this before. I read the JFS ruling many years ago. It was quite fascinating. One or two of the judges dissented and they explained their reasons why. They felt Judaism was not an ethnic identity, etc., etc. So you're perfectly entitled to your dissenting opinion. But if one of those Supreme Court judges in America now goes and says, I will open an abortion clinic because I have interpreted the law differently, then they'll be told you're breaking the law. How can I be breaking the law? I'm following my ruling. You can't follow your minority opinion. But it doesn't make it illegitimate. You can have a difference of opinion. Right? You can go to your leadership, your boss, your manager, your parents, whoever, and say, I don't like the way this is being done. They say, okay, thank you very much. We'll take that on board. Unfortunately, it's not something we can change right now. That doesn't mean it was wrong to raise it. Right? It becomes an issue when it becomes fractious or when it becomes obviously destructive, or importantly and crucially, when it's not true. Right? So criticism of Israel, right? Oh, it's just criticism of Israel. Right, we'll come back to this in the end of this. Right, criticism of Israel is legitimate. Well, first of all, you have to know that depends what your criticism is. Is your criticism genuine criticism of government policy, or is it criticism of the fact that the Jews want a homeland and therefore you say Zionism is racism, and therefore you're basically anti-Zionist and you want to destroy the state of Israel, in which case that's not legitimate, number one. Number two, it's not legitimate if it's based on fake news. Right, so if you criticize Israeli government policies because you believe that they're murdering Palestinian babies because you saw that on Al Jazeera, then you've got a fake news problem. Right? Fake news is not new. Last week we had fake news in the Sedra, right? The spies. We've got some this week as well. So, Datan and Aviram, what was their whole issue? Let's see. What did they say? Who'd like to read number 5?
I will.
Thank you.
Do you want me
Tom?
to?
Any volunteers you haven't read yet? No? Okay. Irish, we come back to you?
I think there was a volunteer just now.
Oh, who was the volunteer?
Well, it was me, but I don't mind.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I don't mind either.
Okay. Is it not enough that you have brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert, that you insist on lording it over us? What is more, you have not brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Do you think you can pull something over our eyes? We will not come up.
Sorry, I just want to look up something. Just get my chumash. I wonder if this is where pull the wool over your eyes comes from. Let's see. Just curious. Bamidbar 16:13. I just copied the translation here, but I'm curious what the original is, because I think this is where the phrase pull the wool over your eyes comes from. Oh, that's interesting. Ah, okay. The actual phrase is, even if you would gouge out our eyes, we will not go up. So Rashi says that they meant that nothing you do will make us follow you. But Sforno says it's figurative for, do you think you can blind us to your failures? Pull the wool over our eyes. How interesting. Okay, it's quite a good translation here. Have you got that you can? Yeah. So basically, now question, is their claim correct? Was Egypt flowing with milk and honey, number 1?
Well, I guess compared with being in the desert.
Well, was it? They were slaves in Egypt. In the desert, they have manna, they have the well of Miriam. You know, we think of a desert, we think of hunger and thirst. They weren't hungry and thirsty. They had a good life. They had manna, they had the well of Miriam, they had quail.
But they were fed up with manna.
Well,
Fed up with manna. They remembered all the different foods they'd had in Egypt.
Yeah, but it wasn't a terrible life. Anyway, does it really seem like a very legitimate claim? So the problem with Korach is not that argument is wrong, that you can't question obedience, that you can't challenge the leadership, that you have, you might see from this, a person might say, we see from the instance of Korach that you have to have blind faith and you have to have submission, which by the way is a very Islamic concept, right? And you have to submit to power and leadership. But no, that's not actually the case. The argument, right? Avram argued with God, Moshe argues with God, Jeremiah argues with God, Job argues with God. There are 70 faces to the Torah, we're told, right? You read the Mishnah, Rabbi X says this, Rabbi Y says that, and the Talmud often gets into that, and there's different views, and there's different, right? So argument in itself, the lesson from Korach and this sticky end is not that arguments are bad, right? What's the lesson? As we know from Pirkei Avos. Who would like to read? Right. Who read the last one? Pam. Iris, do you want to read?
Yes, okay. Any dispute for the sake of heaven will have enduring value, but every dispute not for the sake of heaven will not have enduring value. What is an example of a dispute for the sake of heaven? The dispute between Hillel and Shammai. What is an example of one not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and all his company.
Right. So the problem is, so don't learn from the Parsha of Korach. We need blind obedience to the leadership and we need blind faith and we can't question. Learn from this that you have to have legitimate arguments which are for the sake of heaven, which are not for the wrong reasons. So what's an argument for the sake of heaven? Hillel and Shammai, a halachic dispute. How to interpret something. What's an argument not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and his company. Right, the famous commentary on this. Why doesn't it say Korach on Moshe? Surely his dispute was with Moshe. Why does it say Korach and his and his henchmen?
Because Moses wasn't arguing.
Right. It wasn't an argument. I mean, it wasn't an argument, Moshe. The classic commentaries say, because we said they were a disparate group with different agendas, they couldn't agree themselves, right? How often do you hear, somebody got caught because the thieves were busy arguing over the loot on the way home or whatever, right? I don't know if that still happens nowadays. Everything's digital crime, but right? They robbed a bank and they're on the way home and they start fighting over the loot. So Korach and his own henchmen couldn't agree, right? They had different agendas, different reasons, because also it's something we may not have covered yet in the Tanya share, but there's also a concept that when it comes to matters of holiness, we often find unity and oneness, right? That's why it says when the children of Israel camped by the mountain to give the Torah, they camped as one with unity. And when you have fragmentation and division, that's usually associated with klipa, with unholiness. Right? God is one, so oneness and unity is very much a theme in the realm of holiness and kedusha, and things that are unholy, often we find fragmentation and division, which is exactly what's going on here. So an argument for the sake of heaven is not about power, it's about truth, right? If your child argues with you about something, right? If you're a lawyer and your child is at law school, and your child comes home and they ask you a question, you give them an answer and they prove you wrong from something they've learned in school, right? Or your child's in yeshiva, they come home and they show you very respectfully, obviously, that something's actually not the way you thought it was, right? Most people get a lot of nachas from that. Say we learn from our children. It's wonderful when we learn from our children or from our students, right? There are times in the Gemara where a student challenges one of the Rebbeim and says, I thought you taught us this differently. And the Rebbe says, you're right, I retract. So when you lose an argument because of truth, that's absolutely fine. Ultimately, you're getting to the truth. You're not really losing. You're not losing the argument. It's all part of the process. The seventh phase of the Torah. When an argument's about power, it doesn't work. If you lose, you lose. You lose everything, basically. But also, arguably, when it's about power, the winner also loses out because everybody becomes diminished by a power struggle. Power struggle does no good for anyone. Now, interestingly, how do we know this is true, that a power struggle isn't helpful, even if you're an innocent victim? Let's say Moshe is an innocent victim. It's not his fault. God told him. But at the end of the day, was he damaged by this incident? What was the end of the Korach dispute? What put an end to it? They got swallowed up by the earth, right? That's pretty decisive, right? Did that resolve the tensions?
Probably not. People were probably just scared.
Right. What did the people say to Moshe after this whole business? Let's see. Number 7. Who wants to read?
I read.
Go on.
The next day, the entire Israelite community complained to Moses and Aaron, you have killed the Lord's people.
Right, hardly a ringing endorsement. Oh, Moshe, we realize you're right. We should have stuck by you. Basically, like, what have you done? Right? So it didn't actually help anyone. It diminished even Moshe as well, even though he was the innocent victim. So you could say that as well. When you have a power struggle and a clash like that, ultimately it diminishes everybody. It doesn't do any good. Right? Many societies, unfortunately, might claim to be about truth, but it's not about truth. It's about power. Right? All these military coups and Russia and Ukraine, and the Russians are trying to convince you that the Ukrainians are Nazis and they invaded, to protect freedom and democracy. There's no evidence of that. It's about power. It's a power grab. It's all about power. Like, people know that I can't say it's about power, so I have to say it's about truth. Of course, it's not about truth. It's about power. Right? Rabbi Sachs wrote in 2015 that he compared this with the BDS movement, right? The sanctions movement, particularly anti-Israel, particularly on university campuses. If you look at the alliance of people that are behind a lot of this, they're a very disparate group. You have far left people, you have anti-globalists, you have supporters of the Palestinians, you probably have like LGBT groups, even though if they were in Palestine, they'd probably be murdered. And everyone comes together with a common cause, unfortunately. Right? Very different agendas, but their common cause is basically that they're quite happy to to hear one side and not the other. I mean, truth is, I don't know if you ever heard on the BBC when they talk about, they talk about the Temple Mount or the Western Wall as the third holiest site in Islam, or the disputed site of the Jewish temple, or the exact phrase they use, I can't remember. It's the most absurd thing in the world. If the temple didn't stand there, the whole Christian Bible makes no sense, right? Where were the tables that Yoshka overturned if they weren't in the temple? All the things it writes about, I haven't read the New Testament, all the things it writes about referring to the Jewish temple. If you say the temple never stood there, then you're rewriting history. It makes no sense, but they have no problem with that. Right? Just like Datan Aviram saying Egypt was a land of milk and honey, and we came out so you could kill us, right? Never mind that it's not true, and it was a land of slavery, but it doesn't matter ultimately. In the cause of power, you can sacrifice the truth. That's the problem. The problem we see in many arenas today, unfortunately, in many areas, that the truth is sacrificed often for power. And people don't see, people don't see that it's not genuine. It's the really sad thing. People just don't see it. What's particularly sad about the BDS is, and these cultural boycotts, is that culture and higher education should be apolitical places. They should be places of debate and truth. They shouldn't be places where politics, starts and identity politics starts to play a part. But unfortunately, they very much become that, which is very sad. It's the same problem as Korach. You're basically sacrificing truth for power, which doesn't work. So that's actually a short share today. We're actually finished, believe it or not. So so the question you'd ask now is, how do you achieve that without going too far? Certain things cause offense. I mean, for what it's worth, I happen to think, and I've expressed this before, I'm not convinced that the what's the word? What's the opposite of legalization? Proscription. The proscription of Holocaust denial is helpful. That the countries in Europe where you can be imprisoned for Holocaust denial, I don't believe that's going to help the cause, and it probably just makes people more extreme, to be honest. I'm not sure you should debate these people, but I'm not sure that making something, once you make something illegal, you're on a very slippery slope. What if someone decides that supporting Israel is illegal? Where does it stop? If you're going to proscribe people's opinions, however unpleasant they may be, what point does it stop? Preaching hatred is something else. We look at America with shock because they have this free speech that basically American free speech, First Amendment rights allow you to stand outside a military funeral, as the Westboro Baptist Church do, and say that gays in the military are causing our soldiers to die in conflict, and nobody can do anything about it because it's free speech, right? Or a person could say the president doesn't deserve to be alive. As long as you don't explicitly say, I'm going to go shoot the president, then that's free speech. Now over here, we say that's too extreme, and we don't have that. But then we have the opposite, where we keep reading this news where, somebody got a visit from the police because they tweeted something that was homophobic. And, it is worrying. It is very worrying, actually. But,
the American, they have, Rabbi, the Americans, they've got the right for the arms.
Well, that's another one. The gun control that's a whole different, that's a whole other discussion. Yes, but I'm saying in terms of freedom.
I know, but you were talking about abortion before, but the thing is, I don't agree with abortion either, but that's not the point. That will go undercover, underground. But the hypocrisy of it is they can carry the arms to kill people, but you can't kill the babies.
Right. So a lot of the right wing is very, very pro gun rights and also very much anti-abortion. And people have pointed out that irony, that they're more concerned with the rights of a fetus than they are with the rights of school children. I mean, if you follow any of this news, people are saying, oh, schools need to have one-way systems, with entrance and exit. And if you get to a stage where your school has to be, we have that in our schools, Jewish schools in this country, we have security. If you get to a stage where that's the norm across the whole of society, something's gone badly wrong. That's all I'll say. They have actually just passed a law, the president signed an executive order, that will limit gun ownership for people who have been convicted of domestic violence. There are a few other examples as well. The thing is, this last shooting in Texas, it was a legally owned firearm. So people say, oh, people get guns illegally. Yes and no. I'm not sure this 18-year-old would have gotten illegal gun, but I don't know, the whole thing's very, very disturbing. Right, so that's it. So yes, truth, you have an argument for truth, that's fine. You can even challenge the status quo. You can challenge the powers that be if it's for genuine reasons. Person has to ask themselves if it's genuine, right? You know, if I would be offended, if I would have my nose out of joint because I was never asked to be chief rabbi, so I would go start a whole campaign to dismantle the chief rabbinate because I believe it's colonial and it's a relic of history. And then, you know, I would say, and besides, why wasn't I made chief rabbi? So wait a minute, what's your issue? What's your real issue? Is your issue genuinely that you seek change, or is your issue that you just sour grapes? And that's the problem with Korach. Now, if Korach would have just come along and said, Moshe, I have a question on the parsha. How come it says that we're all holy, we're all priests, and we have you and your brother have certain roles? Can you explain this to me? And Moshe would have said, oh, Korach, what a beautiful, beautiful point to raise. You're absolutely right that although we are the appointed leaders, and that means certain things, but it doesn't put us above everybody else. And you're right, every Jew can be holy. And thank you so much. It would have gone down in history as a very good Devar Torah, making the point that it's not just the rabbis that are holy. But he didn't do that. He challenged them on power grounds. And this is the other famous Shir Rabbi Sachs gave, which is based on one of the writings of the Rebbe, that compared last week, and we've done this shir before, comparing last week and this week, right? Last week we had Eldad and Medad running around giving prophecy. And Yeshua says, you know, Moshe, you have to do something about them. And Moshe says, as we said earlier, it's great, right? So I don't understand. 1 second, you want to spread the word. Along comes Korach and says, why have you got all the power? Give it to more people. Why is Korach not told that's a great idea? We'll make you deputy or something like that. And the answer is because it's the difference between power and influence. And again, Eldad and Medad are going around prophesying. They're spreading the word of Moshe. So that's influence. Influence is a good thing. The more influence you give out, the more influence you have, right? It's like light a candle. Power, though, is a zero-sum game. If you give out power, you lose power.
Actually, Korach did have power, didn't he? Because he was a Levite, and the Levites were the next lot down from the priests.
Right, and he found enough power to get all these people to follow him. But the point is, his challenge to Moshe was a power struggle. That's why Moshe couldn't tolerate it. Right? How do you come to Moshe and
With
say,
power comes responsibility, though.
Sorry?
With power, you've got responsibility.
Of course. And when we say power, we don't mean like responsible power. We mean sort of absolute power, because obviously we talk about power. Power is a very loaded term. Control, right? You know, it's a hierarchy, all these things, right? Not all power is bad. Not all authority is bad, right? People say, oh, you're power crazy, favorite thing. But we do need authority. We do need hierarchy. We do need leadership. We do need people who are given the tools. People complain that teachers can't sanction children nowadays and things like this, you know, or that judges give out light sentences. We do need people with authority to exercise that authority. But it has to be done with humility. Moshe had humility. That's the other thing, which we've talked about previously. It has to come with humility. If it doesn't come with humility, then it's not going to work. That's Korach's mistake. But the good news is, it wasn't all bad, because the psalm that we say before the shofar, Lam Natzeach Livnei Korach Mizmor, is a song to the choir master, to the children of Korach. So I believe we're told that the children of Korach survived and they weren't swallowed up, and they did teshuvah ultimately. So there's hope. There's always hope. Right, I guess we'll stop there. Have an early finish for today. Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi.
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oops.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Right. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank
And
you.
you?